All right, guys, welcome. We're moving into period two. This period is going to span from 1607 to 1754. Notice anytime that we're going into a new period, that means that there's a turning point. Something happened in 1607 and something happened in 1754. And so that's what we're going to explore today. Uh, First of all, you need to know 1607. You absolutely need to know 1607. 1607 was the foundation of the colony Jamestown, which is present day Virginia. All right, so 1607 is the foundation of the colony Jamestown, which is present day Virginia. What you can see here are some of our big ideas, things that you should be questioning throughout this unit as we explore particularly further English colonization. Now, a couple of things I also want to address. What you'll notice is some inconsistencies with the presentation. You'll notice that some slides are kind of bland like this one, and then others have a bit more information or images, etc. What I'm trying to do, because they've redesigned the test, and this is my first time teaching it since the redesign, which was last year, I'm kind of blending my resources. So I'm in the process of creating new material while also taking stuff from the old test that I could salvage to include here, because I really want to make sure that I'm not teaching. It would be super easy for me to just teach it the old way because I have all of those resources. But if I did it that way, and a lot of teachers do it that way, if I did it that way, you wouldn't be as best prepared for the test as possible. So what I'm doing is I'm kind of pulling what I can salvage, but making sure that I hit all of the ideas and all of the areas that you need to know to be successful on the test, but also to be successful in life. All right, I'm not going to leave those things out. So at this time, anyway, if you want to take a little time and take a look at those big ideas, feel free to. We're going to be addressing those questions, or we'll reflect upon those questions towards the end of this unit. English colonization. What you're going to notice is that English colonization is a bit different from Spanish and Dutch and French colonization. Even though we didn't focus a whole lot on that, we kind of breezed through that. A lot of our focus is going to be English colonization, obviously because of the 13 colonies. What we do notice from English colonization is that they are bringing large numbers of immigrants here to the Americas, to the New World. And depending upon the region, that would kind of dictate how many people from each gender are coming over. Some regions have more males than others. Some are dominated by more familial systems where they're bringing males and females and children, etc. So that's very different from Spain and France and Dutch, who came over here for different reasons with different aims. A lot of English colonists would come seeking wealth, also known as economic prosperity. And we'll talk about one of those regions first. Religious freedom. As you're familiar with the Pilgrims, you're probably used to them being called, but we're going to refer to them as Puritans. And they also came seeking better living conditions because of the overcrowding problem that existed in England at the time. They are also going to be different in a way that they welcome immigrants from other countries. And obviously that would only be immigrants from Western European countries. And so Pennsylvania, for example, is going to be known for having quite a few German immigrants. A lot of the colonies are based on agriculture. Obviously, they need to figure out how to survive, so they grow their own food. Anytime we say something is a cash crop, that's how they're making their money. And so tobacco is going to rise during the early stages of English colonization. And if we're talking about populating these colonies and also creating a system of privilege and a system of wealth, that's where the head right system comes into play. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later. Now, there are going to be instances of conflict between the English and Native Americans. And I left one rebellion off of here, but I will address it later. But unlike the French and the Spanish, the English definitely wanted to live separately from Native Americans. Now, we're used to the old story about the first Thanksgiving and all that, which was not necessarily true. While there were some English colonists that developed alliances with Native Americans, for the most part, they preferred to live separately. They would be okay with them maybe assimilating to English culture, adopting an English name, learning the language, and also, especially if we're talking about the New England area, having the natives convert to Christianity or become Puritan in belief. All right, but some of the conflicts that we're going to study are there listed on the screen. The Powhatans, if you're not familiar with them, you are probably familiar with them without even really realizing it. That is the tribe that Pocahontas was a part of. And so, yes, Pocahontas was a real person, even though the movie was not accurate. But we'll talk about that a bit later. We're going to start with Chesapeake. And I said that I said that each period signifies a turning point. Well, 1607 signifies a huge turning point. Jamestown is the first successful English colony. It's not the first colony by the English, because remember, there was the lost colony of Roanoke, which failed miserably. To this day, we have no idea what happened to those people. But Jamestown is the first successful colony. All right. And so that's why 1607 is significant. You have to know 1607. All right. So let's go back a year to 1606. And that's when the London Company was developed. We'll also refer to that as the Virginia Company, named after the Virgin Queen, Queen Elizabeth. All right. What this is a joint stock venture. Think of it like the stock market, a bunch of people coming together. They're putting their money into something and they're hoping for a huge return on their investment. Right. Jamestown, which is in Virginia, named after the Virgin Queen, was founded with an idea and a hope that the investors would strike gold, right? Like they're going to get rich. And so the purpose for them settling Jamestown in the Chesapeake region was to gain wealth, to gain immense wealth. And they thought that it would be relatively easy, even though they had already gone through that failed colony in Roanoke. They still believed that there was some hope and some room for prosperity in the New World. So remember, 1607, Jamestown is founded. Now, this is Chesapeake Bay region. You can see the Chesapeake Bay there near the compass. We're going to focus, obviously, on Jamestown, which is almost just below the center there on the map. Notice, though, where the English are settled, right along the water. Also notice where the Indian villages are, because that's going to play a role in a later conflict. There are some significant geographic and environmental issues. For one, the land is very low and very swampy. Because of this, malaria is a problem. In addition, anytime that there are strong storms, flooding would be an issue. So life in Jamestown was not easy. They put all this money up with the hopes that they're going to strike it rich, but what they realize is it's not what they expected. And so Captain John Smith, is he the right man for the job? Captain John Smith, you're probably familiar with him from Pocahontas, even though in real life he never married Pocahontas. It was another man. John Smith says here, there was no talk but dig gold, wash gold, refine gold, load gold. They truly believed that they would strike it rich in Jamestown. And so they searched everywhere for gold, but no gold was to be found. What ended up happening was what was initiated anyway was what we call the starving times. All right. They could barely get by. They could barely survive. They were getting attacked by Native Americans. They didn't have any food. And so in order to address these issues, Captain Smith tried to keep morale up and keep a tight control over the population of Jamestown. He instituted what we know as martial law, which is when any kind of authority figure is asserting dominance over the populace, over the people, over society. So giving a curfew, making certain regulations, saying that you cannot go certain places, you have to do certain things, where a government authority has complete control over the people. And so he became that authority to kind of try to keep everybody in line. In addition, he wanted to promote productivity. He wanted to make sure that people knew that if you want to find gold, you have to work at it. And so he was constantly pushing people, constantly pushing the settlers, which was predominantly men, to go out there and work. Now, as a result of the starving times, because they did not have food and their crops were not working out very well, and to be honest, they didn't want to go out there and work in the fields, some people resorted to cannibalism. And so there is a documented report We know this from primary source documents, that a man murdered a pregnant woman, one of the few women there, in order to eat her and the baby. All right. In addition to that, some people were abandoning Jamestown altogether, and they were going off to try to live on their own, and some were going back to England if they could, and others were trying to live amongst the Native Americans who were surviving pretty well because they were used to this life. Here you can see the pattern of colonization again. Notice how close they are mostly to the water. A lot of the more inland settlements are going to be people who are of kind of lesser social rank. Right? The wealthy people live closer to the water. And we'll talk about why that is. Now here is John Rolfe. All right? He is the one that helped to make Jamestown prosperous finally. And he is also the man that ended up marrying Pocahontas. Now, while the settlers were looking for literal gold, what John Rolfe ended up developing was this tobacco plant. And we believe that Native Americans taught him how to grow it. At least that's what reports suggest. But what this becomes is Virginia's gold and silver. They're looking for actual gold, but they decide that John Rolfe decides that he's going to go ahead and start to grow tobacco, and this becomes the cash crop. And this is what pulls Jamestown out of those starving times. They end up becoming immensely wealthy. The people who invested in this joint stock company get their money back and some. They get a very, very large return because tobacco booms, not just in the colonies and not just in England, but all over the world eventually. Now, this gave rise to a much needed labor. All right. And so what is going to start during this time is what we call indentured servitude. And that's connected with our head right system. Now, the head right system encouraged immigration. What is said is that each Virginian gets 50 acres of land for each person whose passage they paid. All right. And so obviously the wealthy people would be paying for the passage of others in order to get more and more land. All right. That's where the aristocracy comes in. The aristocracy are going to be the people that benefit from this by gaining more and more and more land. Now, in paying for someone's passage, here's the thing. They're paying for indentured servants. All right, so they're paying for the passage of people to come over here and work in these fields, work in these tobacco fields, so that the rich can keep getting richer because they don't want to go out there and work in the fields. And so a typical indentured contract would span anywhere from 5 to 7 years. Sometimes it could be as long as 12 years and sometimes even longer. They were promised at the end of their contract that they would get freedom dues. What that meant was that they would get land and they would get money. Okay, so if you were an indentured servant, you were promised land and money. But keep in mind, you were essentially a slave for however long your contract lasted. They were not allowed to marry, and only 1 in 10 indentured servants actually outlived their contracts during 1610 to 1614. We're talking very, very difficult lives. And I also want to stress that the indentured servants during this time were white as well as black. All right. So some of them came from Africa, but a lot of them were actually just poor Europeans, poor people in England.